The courtroom was packed, the murmur of voices blending with the hurried footsteps on the wooden floor. Attorney Charlotte Miller took a deep breath before stepping through the doors of the hearing room. She was known for her determination and impeccable ethics, but that morning, she felt something different in the air. Like this case was more than it seemed at first glance. I just wanted to help someone who had nothing, but I never imagined it would change my life forever. Before we continue, if you love stories that inspire and move you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. And tell me in the comments, would you accept an unusual payment for a job? Charlotte never turned down a case over money. Her mission was to fight for justice, not for financial gain. When an elderly woman with a humble appearance walked into her office, her desperate eyes and trembling hands made it impossible for Charlotte to ignore her. "Please, Miss Miller, I don't have money to pay a lawyer, but there's something I can offer in exchange." The woman placed a small object on the table. It looked like a simple, aged locket, with no apparent value. Charlotte examined it curiously. It wasn't gold, nor did it seem like a rare antique. But something about it was intriguing, an almost faded engraving on the back. She hesitated for a moment. Taking a case pro bono was something she occasionally did, but working in exchange for an unknown object? Why did this woman think it could be a fair payment? And what exactly is so special about this locket? Charlotte asked, furrowing her brows. The woman gave a faint smile, but her expression was filled with mystery. "If I told you now, you might not believe me. But if you take this case, you'll discover something that could change your life forever." Charlotte studied the woman for a few moments, trying to determine whether this was just desperation or if there was truly something hidden behind her request. And against all odds, she felt a chill run down her spine. Something inside her told her that this choice would lead her down a path she could never have imagined. She held the locket between her fingers, feeling the cold of the aged metal against her skin. Her instincts told her this was more than it appeared to be. But what exactly? "All right. Tell me more about the case. What do you need?" she asked, keeping her gaze fixed on the woman in front of her. The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret Hayes, clasped her thin hands together and took a deep breath before responding. "My brother passed away recently, and they're trying to take the house we've lived in our whole lives. They claim there are unpaid debts, but something's off. He never mentioned any debts to me, and the documents seem forged." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Real estate fraud cases weren't uncommon, but something about the way Margaret spoke sent a shiver through her. "Do you have the documents with you?" Margaret reached into her worn-out bag and pulled out a stack of yellowed papers, handing them over with trembling hands. Charlotte immediately began analyzing them. Some signatures looked slightly misaligned, as if they had been copied. On top of that, the official stamp had tiny irregularities, something unusual for legitimate documents. "Have you tried contesting this before?" "Yes, but the bank's lawyers ignored my appeals. They said the house has already been sold and that I only have a few days to leave." Charlotte felt anger rise within her. Cases like this shouldn't happen, and yet they did, all the time. She closed the papers, took a deep breath, and looked at Margaret seriously. "I'll take the case." Margaret smiled in relief, but Charlotte noticed something curious. The woman seemed more emotional than expected. It was as if she was entrusting her with something far more valuable than it appeared. "Thank you, truly. You have no idea what you're about to uncover." Charlotte was intrigued. What did this woman mean by that? She cast another glance at the locket on the table. There was something there, something that didn't make sense yet, and she was about to find out. That night, Charlotte sat at her desk, Margaret's documents spread out in front of her. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the case, her eyes kept drifting back to the locket. She picked it up again, examining it more closely. The object was small, its metal darkened with age, with delicate hand-carved details. On the back, almost invisible, was a worn-out inscription. "The truth waits for those who dare to see." Charlotte frowned. The phrase felt strangely cryptic. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, trying to feel if there was anything more. That's when she noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible slit on the side. With a gentle touch, the locket clicked open. Inside was a small piece of paper, folded multiple times. Her heartbeat quickened. What could possibly be hidden here? Carefully, she unfolded the paper, revealing shaky, old handwriting. If you've found this, it means the danger is real. They cannot take what belongs to us. The answer is in the will. Trust only the truth. A shiver ran down Charlotte's spine. Who had written this? Was it connected to Margaret's case? She immediately grabbed her phone and called the old woman. Mrs. Hayes, I need you to tell me the truth. This locket, did it belong to your brother? On the other end of the line, Margaret let out a long sigh before answering. Yes, and he told me to give it to the right person, someone who wouldn't be afraid to uncover the truth. Charlotte felt a knot form in her stomach. This case had just become much more than a simple real estate dispute. The will your brother mentioned. Do you have any idea where it is? There was a brief silence before Margaret whispered, Yes, but it was never officially recorded. It's hidden. Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment. If this was true, it could change everything. But it also meant someone was determined to keep this information buried at any cost. And now she was right in the middle of it. Charlotte spent the night wide awake, reading and rereading the locket's message. The warning felt desperate, almost like a plea. Who had written it? Margaret's brother himself? Or someone who had tried to protect him before it was too late? The next morning, she got in her car and drove to Margaret's house. The neighborhood was old, with narrow streets and Victorian-style homes, charming but worn down by time. As she pulled up in front of the residence, she immediately noticed something odd. The front door was slightly open. A chill ran down her spine. Charlotte stepped out of the car slowly, scanning the surroundings. The wind rustled the trees, and everything seemed too quiet. Her gut told her something was wrong. She climbed the porch steps cautiously, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. Mrs. Hayes, she called, her voice echoing through the empty house. No answer. Charlotte walked through the living room, taking in the antique furniture, the unlit fireplace, the family portraits on the walls. Everything seemed in place, until she reached the kitchen. There were signs that someone had been there recently. A cup of tea still steamed on the table, and the cordless phone lay off the hook. But what caught her attention the most was the open drawer, papers scattered across the floor. Someone had been looking for something. And then she saw it. A torn envelope, ripped in half, with the word "will" written at the top. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest. Someone knew about the document's existence. And if they had tried to take it, that meant it was real and dangerous for whoever was in control. Suddenly, a noise from upstairs made her body freeze. Footsteps. Charlotte held her breath. She wasn't alone. Her eyes swept the room, searching for something to defend herself with. She grabbed a heavy metal candlestick from the counter and started moving slowly, stepping lightly to avoid making noise. She climbed the stairs cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. With each step, the footsteps above seemed to pick up speed. Whoever was up there knew she was coming. Reaching the hallway, Charlotte saw a shadow shift at the far end, near Margaret's bedroom. Hey! Who's there? Her voice came out firm, but her body was tense. For a brief moment, silence took over the house. And then, the bedroom door suddenly swung open. Someone bolted out, escaping down the back staircase before Charlotte could react. She rushed to the window and caught a glimpse of a hooded figure disappearing down the side street. Her heart still racing, she turned back to Margaret's room. There was something in there that the intruder hadn't managed to take. And Charlotte was about to find out what it was. She stepped into the bedroom, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The bed was messy, drawers were open, books scattered across the floor. Someone had gone through everything, but it seemed they hadn't found what they were looking for. Taking a deep breath, she tried to organize her thoughts. If Margaret said the will was hidden, then it wouldn't be in an obvious place. Putting herself in the old woman's shoes, Charlotte scanned the room, analyzing every detail. Then her eyes landed on an old wooden dresser. Unlike the rest of the furniture, which had been ransacked, it remained untouched, as if no one had dared to open it. She approached and pulled out the top drawer. Nothing but neatly folded clothes. The second drawer was also filled with personal belongings, but when she reached the third, something caught her attention. The bottom of the drawer felt uneven. Running her fingers over the wooden surface, she felt a small gap. Her heart pounded. Carefully, she pried open the false bottom of the drawer and found a thick, time-worn envelope. On the top, bold letters were etched into the paper. Last Will and Testament of Richard Hayes. She held her breath. This was the proof that could change everything. Charlotte opened the envelope and began reading the first few lines. And that's when it all made sense. Richard Hayes had never been in debt. On the contrary, he owned a highly valuable property that had never been officially recorded. But someone within the real estate company had tried to erase its existence to claim the property for themselves. The name of the person behind the scheme was there, discreetly written at the end of the document. And when Charlotte read it, the floor seemed to disappear beneath her feet. She knew this person, which meant she was dealing with something far more dangerous than she had imagined. Suddenly, a noise from downstairs made her body freeze. Someone was back to finish the job. She couldn't stay there. Charlotte swiftly grabbed the will, stuffed it into her bag, and looked for an escape route. The window. It was her only chance. She unlocked it and, with a calculated move, jumped down into the backyard, landing on the damp grass. Just as she sprinted toward her car, she heard the front door slam open with force. She had escaped just in time. But now, she knew she was being watched, and that the real battle was only just beginning. The engine roared as Charlotte sped through the narrow streets of the neighborhood. Her hands trembled on the wheel, her heart still racing, struggling to keep up with the whirlwind of thoughts flooding her mind. She needed a plan. She had the will, but now it was clear. Someone was willing to do whatever it took to keep this truth buried. Charlotte drove to her office, making sure she wasn't being followed. As soon as she stepped inside, she locked the door, pulled down the blinds, and tossed her bag onto the desk, pulling out the will with urgency. She needed to reread every detail. The document confirmed that Richard Hayes had never sold the family property. On the contrary, he had left the house to his sister, Margaret. But a name on the last page made Charlotte swallow hard. Daniel Whitmore. The revelation hit her like a shockwave. Daniel was a respected attorney, and her former mentor, a man she had admired for years, someone she had considered a guiding figure in her career. But now, his name was right there, directly tied to an attempted real estate fraud. Charlotte felt a heavy weight settle in her chest. She got up from her chair and paced back and forth. What was she supposed to do now? If Daniel was involved, it meant she was up against someone powerful, influential, and dangerous. She grabbed her phone and dialed Margaret's number, but no one answered. She tried again. Nothing. Her stomach twisted. Something inside her screamed that Margaret was in danger. Without a second thought, Charlotte grabbed her bag and rushed out. She needed to find her before it was too late. But the moment she opened the office door, she found herself face to face with a tall, imposing man dressed in a dark suit. He blocked the exit, his gaze cold and calculating. "Miss Miller, I think we have a problem." Charlotte felt her blood run cold. The game had just become even more dangerous. She kept her expression firm, even as her heart pounded wildly in her chest. The man standing before her wasn't just some messenger. He radiated menace, the kind of presence that suggested he was used to handling problems in a permanent way. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The man smirked slightly, in no rush to answer. "Just someone who wants to make sure you don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." Charlotte crossed her arms, holding his gaze. "If you think intimidation is going to make me back down, you're dead wrong." The man let out a dry chuckle and stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You're smart, Charlotte. So you already know. Some truths don't need to come out. This case is already settled." A chill ran down her spine. "Settled? What do you mean?" The man slid a sheet of paper onto the desk. "Margaret Hayes signed an agreement. She has nothing to do with the house anymore." Charlotte picked up the paper with trembling hands. The words were clear. A formal document stating that Margaret had renounced all her rights to the property. But something was off. The signature. Charlotte had seen Margaret's signature on the will's documents, and this wasn't the same. It was a forgery. She lifted her gaze back to the man. "This is fake." He shrugged. "The issue isn't whether it's fake or not. The issue is that, on paper, it's done." A tight knot formed in Charlotte's throat. They were forging everything, and they had enough influence to make it look legitimate. "Where is Margaret?" she asked, trying not to let the desperation seep into her voice. The man kept his cold, unreadable smirk. "She's fine, for now, but she asked you to drop this matter, and for your own good, you should listen." Charlotte felt rage bubbling inside her. They were trying to silence her, but she wasn't backing down. With firm steps, she grabbed the will from the desk and shoved it into her bag. "This isn't over." The man sighed and adjusted the cuffs of his suit. "It's a shame you're not as smart as you seem." Then, unhurriedly, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Charlotte alone, with a fraudulent document in her hand and a dangerous certainty. Margaret was in trouble. And now, Charlotte wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting against someone who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to silence her. Charlotte didn't waste a second. As soon as the man disappeared through the door, she grabbed her keys and rushed out of her office. Every second counted. If Margaret had truly been forced to sign that fake document, then her life could be in danger. She drove straight to the old woman's house, her heart pounding against her ribs. The overwhelming feeling that something terrible was about to happen only grew stronger. When she arrived, she noticed that the lights were off. The front gate was slightly open, swaying gently with the wind. She swallowed hard. Stepping out of the car, she entered cautiously. "Margaret," she called, but only silence answered back. The house was completely ransacked, worse than before. Drawers were ripped open, furniture overturned, cushions slashed apart. A clear sign that someone had been searching for something, and they had done it in a hurry. Charlotte ran up the stairs, flinging doors open one by one. Margaret's bedroom was empty. Then, something on the hallway floor caught her eye. A white lace handkerchief, stained with blood. A chill crept down Charlotte's spine. Margaret had been taken. Her thoughts immediately went to Daniel Whitmore. He was the center of this entire scheme. He knew Charlotte had the will, and now he was trying to eliminate any possibility of contesting it. But there was one problem. He didn't know that Charlotte had the original document. She needed to move fast. She grabbed her phone and dialed an old contact, a journalist who had helped her on past cases. "Ryan, I need your help. I have proof of a real estate fraud, and someone's life may be in danger." "Are you serious, Charlotte?" "Very, and I'm running out of time. Can you track someone for me?" There was a brief pause before his response. "Send me the details. I'll see what I can do." Charlotte hung up and forced herself to think rationally. If Margaret had been taken, they couldn't have gone too far. She needed to follow the clues while she still had time. She grabbed her laptop and began searching through all of Daniel Whitmore's business addresses and real estate holdings. He had a lot of connections in the market, but Charlotte was looking for something specific, a discreet location where they could hold Margaret without drawing attention. And then she found it. An old warehouse owned by a shell company tied to Daniel. Her heart raced. She knew where to go. And this time, she wasn't going alone. Charlotte drove as fast as she could, weaving through the dark city streets. Her heart pounded with both anticipation and fear. If Margaret was still alive, this was the only place she could be. She parked at a safe distance from the abandoned warehouse and killed the headlights. The place was surrounded by barbed wire, dimly lit by rusted streetlights. The building itself looked like it had been forgotten by time, but Charlotte knew that behind its rundown appearance, something much more sinister was hiding. Before stepping out of the car, Charlotte grabbed her phone and called Ryan. "I'm at the address. Did you find anything?" "Yeah. This shell company has been used for years to launder money from fraudulent real estate deals. Daniel Whitmore's name pops up in multiple suspicious transactions. But there's something even more concerning." "What is it?" "Some of the company's employees mysteriously disappeared after trying to expose the fraud. If Margaret is in there, she might not have much time." Charlotte felt a knot tighten in her throat. "I'm going in. If anything happens to me, call the police." She hung up before Ryan could argue. Moving silently, she approached the building, staying within the shadows. Through the warehouse's grimy window, she spotted two men in suits arguing near a table. And in the corner of the room, tied to a chair, was Margaret. Her face was pale, and a small cut on her forehead glistened under the dim light. Charlotte clenched her fists. She needed to act fast. Scanning her surroundings, she found a side door left slightly open. Taking a deep breath, she slipped inside, moving carefully between crates and rusted shelves. She managed to get close enough to hear the conversation. "The old woman isn't the problem anymore," one of the men said impatiently. "The problem now is the lawyer. She has the will." Charlotte felt a chill run through her spine. "Did Whitmore order us to deal with her?" the other asked. "If she doesn't know when to quit, yes." That was all Charlotte needed to hear. She grabbed a metal rod from the ground and with a precise strike knocked over a pile of boxes, sending them crashing down. The men spun around, startled, and in that brief second of distraction, Charlotte rushed to Margaret and began untying her. "Charlotte," Margaret murmured weakly. "Can you walk?" I think so." The men quickly realized what was happening. "Hey, stop right there!" Charlotte helped Margaret to her feet and without hesitation grabbed a fire extinguisher from a nearby wall. With a firm squeeze, she released a thick white cloud of foam, blinding the men and creating the perfect diversion. "Run!" she urged Margaret. They dashed toward the side exit, but the thunderous footsteps behind them meant the men were close. And then Charlotte heard it. Sirens. In seconds, police cars surrounded the warehouse, their flashing lights illuminating the night. Ryan stood by the officers, pointing directly at the criminals. "We got you!" one of the cops shouted, gun drawn. The men tried to run, but within moments they were tackled and handcuffed. Charlotte helped Margaret into an ambulance while the police began making arrests. Then she spotted a familiar figure standing farther away. Daniel Whitmore. He stood by his car watching her. For a long moment, their eyes locked. He didn't say a word. He simply got into his car and disappeared into the night. But Charlotte knew this wasn't over. She had the will. And now she had to make sure the truth came to light. 2 days after the rescue, Charlotte stood before the courthouse, holding Richard Hayes' original will. The case was now in the hands of the justice system, but she knew her job wasn't done yet. Margaret, still recovering from the ordeal, sat beside her, gently squeezing her hand in gratitude. "If it weren't for you, my home would have been taken. I can never thank you enough, my dear." Charlotte gave a soft smile. "You deserved the truth. And now everyone will know what really happened." The hearing was intense. Charlotte presented all the evidence she had gathered, the original will, the forged signature, and the financial records that linked Daniel Whitmore to the fraudulent scheme. The prosecutors were relentless. In the end, the judge had no choice but to declare the fraudulent document null and restore Margaret's home to her. On top of that, he ordered a formal investigation into Whitmore and his accomplices, who now faced serious charges. When the hearing was over, Charlotte stepped out of the courthouse, feeling like a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Ryan was waiting for her outside, arms crossed, and a satisfied smirk on his face. "You really don't know how to stay out of trouble, do you?" Charlotte chuckled. "If I did, I wouldn't be such a good lawyer." He shook his head and handed her a copy of that morning's newspaper. "Real estate scandal exposed. Lawyer uncovers $1 million fraud." She skimmed the headline, a quiet sense of pride growing inside her. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Daniel Whitmore was still out there. He may have lost this battle, but men like him never went down without a fight, and Charlotte was ready for whatever came next. Beside her, Margaret looked up at the sky, taking a deep breath as if she were finally free. "You know, Charlotte, my brother always used to say that the truth has a funny way of finding its way out." Charlotte smiled and held the locket Margaret had given her at the start of all this. He was right. And with that, they walked away, knowing that, despite everything, justice had won.